All right. I just realized something from my previous two videos. I mentioned things that truth and goodness are matters of relations and definitions, or definitions and relations. And basically, I thought I would outline the some extra aspects to this whole thing. That is why the right wing Christians are better than the left wing atheists. So basically, if there is no origin point that's singular in regards to truth and goodness, people will generally get the impression, because of the initial gains, that cunning is better than wisdom. Doesn't matter what you call wisdom, doesn't matter what you call cunning. It is what it is either which way, and I've already described it. Wisdom is that which you gain from sharing, and cunning is that which you gain from hiding. And of course, a society where everyone hides everything from everyone else is not a cohesive, cooperative adventure. A system in which everyone shares everything with everyone else um, is a more functional system, basically. It's a better system because it allows for trust and cooperation. Now, I know that there's certain degrees of oversharing and stuff like that, and there's like appropriate times to share certain things and inappropriate times and so on. Um, and I know that with certain evil people, sharing a vulnerability can be devastating because they use it to their own advantage and so on. So there's a degree of discernment, and again, part of wisdom is knowing when to share something and when not to, because someone will destroy you if you share it, or someone will benefit with you at the same time if you share it. I know that confession of sins is important because, and this ties into why God has to be truth and goodness as the source of it all, and so on, is you can confess your wrongdoings and failings to God, and He will guide you to goodness and not arriving at, but approaching perfection. And perfectionism is wrong because you assume you know where the limit is, the upper limit of what goodness is. And you just don't. You can evolve or flesh out increasing layers of goodness and find ways to reach the heights of what is actually good for you and other people and so on. Increasingly, and that's what cultivation is about. But you don't know the limits of it, so don't pretend you do. And if you say to yourself, I'm tired of hurting my brain understanding things that are beyond me, then it's an admission of failure on some level. But what I'm going to say is going to be a little gentle compared to other things, which is you can do that for a time. You do not necessarily just go like, oh, I'm going to be level 20 out of 100 today, and then I'm just going to evolve to level 50 out of 100 tomorrow. Sometimes you need to flesh out the level you're on so that it's a proper foundation to begin the next level of ascension, of wisdom, and so on. And that's one of the things that people need to learn is sometimes you need to do what's called dead work to flesh out the details of the understanding of the world that you're on, the level of. But you can also sort of approach a more abstracted and yet more meta sort of like common thread or what's called an axiom, which is like a principle that your system can't, it just has to exist as that for your system to work as is. And you might be able to do deeper and deeper axioms and so on, but there's going to be a limit of your understanding on this earth. It's just going to be inevitable. We're all limited on this earth on some level. Doesn't matter how far you go, you're going to hit a wall eventually that you just cannot possibly pass. But I want to say, do not make the mistake of assuming you're totally good enough without any development until you've hit about 60, 50 years old. And even when you're 50 or 60, you're going to have little things that kind of nudge you towards developing further, I think. And also remember that until you're about 50, according to Jordan Peterson, you're constantly developing your worldview, and you should not slack off and be totally lazy. But it is okay to occasionally say, like, okay, look, I'm hurting my brain trying to understand this higher level, and, like, I just want to experience life and be on my own level at the moment. Don't be lazy about developing, but also don't be like, oh, I have to raise one level per day, or something like that, you know what I mean? Or, like, one level per year or something. You don't force yourself to, like, ascend. You sort of just look for knowledge, and, like, it'll come to you over time, or, like, maybe you listen to someone else who's got it somewhat understood, and you're like, oh, that's how that could work. And the reason why I outlined wisdom versus cunning is because people often make the mistake of assuming because they have a certain level of understanding that is above average in one domain, they know all of it. And the truly wise understand that there's so much more they could understand. That's kind of where the position of the only thing I know is that I know nothing is basically saying in a way, because anything divided by infinity is zero. But on a non-infinite scale, you can have actual comparisons that are meaningful. So it's your relation to God and His truth, and it's your relation to information, benefit from sharing, benefit from hiding, and your relations with people, share or confuse. And basically, because the better society gets with sharing wisdom, and the worse society gets by cunningly hiding knowledge that is useful to people, that is why the devil was a liar from the beginning and a murderer. Because it's anti-good living for everyone, in a way. Like, don't get me wrong, there is like a certain element of like, you hide information from people that are trying to kill you so that they can't kill you as well. But like, you know what I mean? It's like that's a product of being limited as a person and with your own flaws and failings and so on. And cunning is like an adrenaline rush or like going berserk in a fight. If you rely on it, it's going to degrade your overall cultivation of capabilities and so on. Only being good at fighting when you're angry means you're going to get worse and worse at fighting as you grow older. But cultivating skill in fighting without getting super berserk will make it so that if you continue to do so, you will get better and better at fighting until eventually your body starts to fail to the point that your skills cannot make up your raw physical lack of ability. And that goes with wisdom and your mind and so on as well. And cunning is the thing that basically is like, if someone is wiser than you and you try and be cunning with them, you're absolutely doomed. But if you choose wisdom with someone who's more wise than you, they will elevate you. So I thought that I would describe the general patterns of like how approaching things works and so on. And that's my explanation. Again, I'm not going to say you cannot use cunning at some times in life. Sometimes it might be necessary for your continued well-being on any given level whatsoever. Like a complete, like you might rely on cunning to avoid absolute disaster for yourself. But it should not be the normal thing. And that is also why newspeak and constantly reinventing words, meanings, and constantly forcing people to use new words for the same old thing is not going to work in the end, because what's solid, like you might begin forcing people to use new language for the same old thing. You might be able to confuse people and mislead them and get your own way and so on. But eventually a pattern will emerge of you doing that, and then they will reconnect all the dots of the old and the new language and the previous new but now old languages, and they will form a trajectory and form an etymology, which is a history of language, and they will pay attention to it more than before when they were naive about it, and they will be wise, and you will not be able to deceive them anymore because they will understand the various patterns behind everything because they paid attention. And that is why the right is going to win the culture war and politically in the end, because they are more geared towards wisdom and the left is more geared towards cunning. And while you have a high trust society, people slacken their pursuit of wisdom so that they become naive over the generations compared to before in some sense. And that is why the left wins in the end, or wins at the beginning of cultural decay and so on, and speeds up the decline. And then people notice the trajectory in the past that was soft, and then the plummeting uh, well-being, when people embraced the direction that it was going already, more heavily, and they begin to reverse course. Another distinction to make is, and this is, by the way, why people who are honest with themselves eventually might start off by being cunning and then become wise in the end. This is redemption in a nutshell. Redemption is when someone who is focused on cunning begins to learn wisdom. And basically, what it takes is for cunning to decline their living conditions and then to double down on cunning because it worked before and then face really jaw-dropping declines in well-being for those people doing it. And then they realize cunning isn't going to cut it. And they begin to look for the opposite thing. And then they realize wisdom is the good path. Because it slows the decline, then it reverses the decline, and then it builds back up what was destroyed. And that is why they say you have to go through hell to get to heaven. Because you need to experience the initially tempting, wrong way that starts strong and gives you a bit of a thrill and a belief in its power, and then double down on it, experience severe failure more and more, and then triple down on it and experience ultimate failure, and then go like, oh, it's the opposite of that, and you build yourself back up again. And that's what God teaches us over and over and over again. So that's why people fall to sin and then rise to heaven. And ultimately, that is the Christian story of the fall of mankind through Adam and the ascendancy of mankind through Jesus. And that's how it all correlates. But it does require a certain understanding that truth and goodness, at least, are higher than falsehood and evil, and more powerful in the end. And by the way, this is also the difference between the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force, in a rough sense, in Star Wars when it's valid, minus the specific Buddhist sort of celibacy, forcing children to be monks or fighters or put their lives at risk and so on. Jedi kidnapping children and making sure they don't have children of their own and so on thing. So that's a caveat to the light side versus dark side approach. Do not be Buddhist about it. Being a monk of Christianity is a very personal decision in adulthood. It is not a forced on children thing. And it's not for everyone, and it's not about whether you have superpowers or not. It's about what you're called to as a person character-wise. So it's about honesty, not, oh, we can't have super powerful people in the world with having their own children. You actually want evolutionary development towards further advantages, and that means if people had superpowers, you want more people to be born with those superpowers, so you would actually allow them to have children and then spread their genes that lead to superpowers to more and more of the population. right? Because if we stopped at being monkeys, we would never have as good of a life as we have now on average. And what this means is you need a certain trust in the benevolence of people better than you at things. But there's a character relation to it, which is that of wisdom. Are they more inclined towards wisdom or cunning? And that's when you begin to trust them or distrust them as a person. And there's certain classes of like politicians and activists and NGOs that use government money and so on, that tend towards cunning. And Islam is really notable for this too, with the taqiyya and postmodernism and leftism and communism and so on are very cunning oriented, which is why they're evil. Someone who says they're Christian but like rabidly beats their children and like attacks them with weapons or like breaks things on their heads or something is using cunning, not wisdom. They are not a true Christian because they're not following Christ's lessons. It's definitional in that case. Because God is truth and goodness. And don't get me wrong, the death penalty for a child rapist is perfectly just and true and good. But like beating a child half to death because they ate like a pancake extra when you wanted it is evil. And like what you notice is child abusers tend to like rely on the child not talking about it, which is why criminals and thugs and miserable bastards and gangsters say the phrase generally, or some sort of ethos behind it similar, that snitches get stitches. There is a certain case to be made that if you're like a bunch of random people online and you're not that many and you're not that powerful or influential and you're just griping and miserable and kind of annoyed and like kind of use strong language and so on, you should not be harassed for it, but also you should not necessarily be influential with that approach. I will give a further caveat to this, which is to say, people can have private, angry venting, and it should be basically allowed in most cases. Maybe someone should gently suggest that they not be quite so angry. That is a general good rule for such things. But being angry and expressing that you're angry in a bit of a forceful language that is not super violent, let's say, or violent at all necessarily. It depends. Yeah, like it depends. Like if you say something like, "I'm going to nuke the Earth to get rid of the Jeets," like, okay, well, you don't have the power to do that as a random nobody online. So like, okay, that's like an expression. That's like a turn of phrase. It's not like a actual, like you could actually do it kind of thing. And like the reason people choose those kinds of words is because they expect other people to recognize that they're not actually being serious about like nuking the Earth, right? Those are the cases that I would suggest harassing them online, secret informants, infiltrators, and agent provocateurs, and feds, and so on, is very inappropriate. But if someone's like, I'm going to shoot Charlie Kirk on September 10th at, what was it? I can't remember the university, but like if someone was like specific details that are within their actual control and power, and it was like actionable on their part, and like you actually saw it and were like, oh, they could actually do that, and they're kind of specific about the details, and like they said, like on so and so roof or something as well, then that is when you do the informant and the getting the police involved and so on. Yeah, and it goes for anyone doing those kinds of things. It's like a certain something or other. And accepting that in privacy someone could be a little more uncharitable because they're just emotionally raw and they don't want to put in the effort to be kind to people that they don't expect to ever know what they're saying, is like, there's even two dimensions to this. One is it's gossip behind someone's back, especially in personal drama sometimes. And that's a possibility. And the other one is, it's just them being themselves honestly. And in these exact conditions, someone can recognize they are not as generous or magnanimous or kind or loving towards someone as they should be, but they need, if they're going to be that way, they need to put an extra effort, and that's what the public face is for. Now, it's not always the case. Sometimes it is cunning, which is why it's confusing at times, because they're trying to put a public face of, I love these people, and then they're privately like, I hate these people. Or I'm just using these people for my own good. But that's why that's why you say actions speak louder than words. So if you're like, I hate these people, but you're also like for instance, my version of this is I basically in private say I absolutely hate the left and so on. And you can see it in my language towards the left, even publicly. But I'm not hiding that I'm really pissed off with the left. But at the same time, you can tell probably that I'm trying to provide a certain degree of tolerance to the left in some ways. So I mean, I was pretty leftist at one point, and I hated the right wing, and now I'm kind of right wing, and I hate the left wing. But at the same time, I've been both. So like for me, there's like this sort of like, I'm trying to redeem the good aspects of the left that I think is mostly evil. Whereas before I was kind of like absolutely hating the right. And I was like, like just absolutely spitting rage at the right wing. So for me, it's a switch of sides, but it's also a certain degree of understanding which in one way condemns the left further because I know both and I pick the right, or the center right, and maybe the center left, if you consider classical liberalism to be center left. But in another sense, I'm also trying to sort of like pick the like be honest about the left and not just totally against it. Like I'm trying to find things that I consider valid, and appreciative towards the left when it's actually a good thing. I do think the left is less good than the right, but I used to think the right was evil and the left was the only good part. So even with my switch, there's been a moderation because I've been on both ends and I understand them. And I'm not saying the left is completely without merit in every situation, but I am selecting a preference and I am sort of like grumpy about it. I don't think anyone's totally wise or totally cunning, left or right. But I do think the right is more based in wisdom and the left is more based in cunning typically, precisely because the right tends towards Christianity with an all-knowing God that is truth and goodness, which means it's a person with a will, which means it'll judge you on whether you're good or bad in any given situation and in general, and you cannot trick it. But if you're loyal to it as a person, you will learn truth and you will become good. And leftist atheism just lacks that device. You can be good despite leftism, but you can only be good with, like you can be good despite being leftist, and you are more good because you were right wing on average. It's not always the case, but that is a general rule from what I've understood now. And part of it also is that statistically, apparently, according to studies, the right can understand the left, but the left cannot understand the right very well. And I'm going to be honest, I've had my experiences of both now, and that's exactly how I developed. So yeah. I realize that this might sound like a locked-in argument for right-wing ascendancy and left-wing total devastation, but I've explicitly said there are valid elements to leftism that are purposeful and valuable in society. It's just they should not be the primary power in society. Despite my very grumpy nature towards the left nowadays. And that's how it all ties together, basically.